least of which is not the least is the physical presence of the campus itself. Now, architecturally, cities happen largely by accident. In general, they develop as a patchwork of different architectural styles, each architect trying to make his or her own unique mark on the urban landscape. But other communities, like a college campus, tend to direct more attention to the cumulative effect of their buildings and open spaces. More emphasis is put on the harmony of these spaces toward each other and what the campus as a whole says about itself. The collegiate Gothic architectural style is just that. It's a statement about the university, its history, customs, and values. In this style, these ideas can be dramatized quite literally in a building's decoration. And some interesting decorative elements of this trend are the grotesque and the gargoyle. Gothic architecture dates from medieval Europe, but the Gothic buildings that we see at Yale were built in the collegiate Gothic style. This was a popular trend around the turn of the 20th century, when decorating a campus with Gothic buildings was meant to give the universities a rich sense of history and tradition. While these buildings at Yale look almost medieval, many are less than 100 years old. This means that while Yale's grotesques and gargoyles may look very old, many are relatively modern in their concept and themes. My book is called An Education in the Grotesque, The Gargoyles of Yale University. Notice I've used the words grotesque and gargoyle in the title. Now here's an example of a grotesque. It's a student distracted from his textbooks by a newfangled radio set. This was produced around 1930, so the radio is an antique by modern standards, but the concept of being distracted by new technology has never been more relevant than today. A grotesque is defined as a decorative sculpture on or in a building, usually a person or animal or fanciful creature whose form may be exaggerated to the point of caricature. The word gargoyle is from the old French word gueguille, the root of the verb to gargle, because it refers to the throat or gullet. It is a specific type of grotesque that's used to channel rainwater off of the roof and away from the building, so as to protect the masonry from erosion. So basically, it's a decorative rain spout. That having been said, I use these definitions in their broadest sense to mean any interesting decoration on or in a building. I took this photo in the wintertime when many gargoyles sport long icicle goatees. First stop in our safari is Bingham Hall, which stands at the corner of College and Chapel Streets in New Haven. It was constructed in 1928 and has many memorials to Yale buildings and societies that have occupied it. This spot, but I'm interested in some of the other decoration, like this one, where university namesake Elihu Yale is shown in a crest flanked by these two creatures. What are they? Turns out these are mythical creatures, called, appropriately enough, the Yale. The Yale was said to be similar to an antelope, but with independently swiveling antlers and a rather belligerent disposition. The Yale predates Yale University by almost 2,000 years and was first described by Pliny the Elder back in Roman times. I became curious about this Yale creature because it appears elsewhere on Bingham and some of the other buildings around the campus as well. Here's the Yale near the top of Bingham Central Tower as an adult, and midway up the tower in juvenile form. You can tell it's a young one because it only has little nubs for antlers. The Yale can be found elsewhere on campus, like the pediment area over the main entrance to Timothy Dwight College. Because they never actually existed, these Yales are open to artistic interpretation. This version has spots, a tail like an elephant, an almost primate-like face, and a goatee. And an actual goatee, and an almost primate-like face. To me, it looks to be something from the mind of Dr. Seuss. Davenport College features two different types of Yale. On the courtyard of Davenport's York Street building, the Yale appears as a muscular snowling. On the front of the same building, the Yale appears again as a fanciful Gothic pony. Why are there two different styles of Yale on the same building? Because there are two different architectural styles on this one building. From the courtyard, Davenport's York Street building looks like the rest of the college, designed in the Federal style, which is derived from the architecture of the Revolutionary War period, with red brick, white painted wood trim, with some decoration but very few grotesques. Now, if you go through the exit tunnel in the middle of the building and out to York Street, then look back at the same building you just walked through, you'll see the same building but in the grotesque, rich, collegiate Gothic style. This is meant to harmonize with the other collegiate Gothic buildings across the street. On this side, the main entrance features students studying diligently, but there's another Yale family symbol. At the crown of the archway is a wild boar trapped in a net, a symbol from Elihu Yale's family crest. The entrance to the kitchen is demarcated by a platter of roast turkey. Just above this is Dr. Fostus, who, according to German legend, sold his soul to a demon for knowledge and power. These grotesques are strategically placed, serving as a warning to those who are gluttons for food, as well as those who are gluttons for knowledge and power. I include these because they demonstrate another point I want to make about Yale's grotesques. Sometimes it's not just the form of a grotesque that's important. Their location can play a significant role in their meaning as well. To further illustrate this, on one side of a window frame, a student reads by oil lamp, the lamp from Yale's slogan, Light and Truth, with AC carved below. On the opposite side of the window, an engineer uses a surveying scope and plumb line, with Chef for Sheffield Scientific School below. These two grotesques are on opposite sides of the same window. Both schools are part of Yale College, but their placement on opposing sides of the window demonstrate the distinct entities these schools had become by the late 1800s. Vanderbilt Hall is a dormitory on Old Campus that's guarded by these ferocious canines. Near the top is a lion gargoyle, built with a drain in its mouth. Also note the square of foliage below it. There are many of these spaced around the corners of the building, but some of the others are strangely symmetrical with recognizable facial features, eyes, nose, mouth, and in some cases, cheeks. The old art gallery houses many works of art, and there are many interesting ones on the outside as well, like these animal skulls. Note these rams have fleshed out bodies, but only skulls for heads. Why the skulls, you may ask? They illustrate an important aspect of art, that of exposing what lies below the surface, both literally and figuratively. There's also a wild boar, a primate, and another primate. I like the primates, I just like the expression on their faces. And others are more fantastic, like this Chimera Gargoyle, which looks to be a conglomeration of the spare parts from other grotesques in the building. This guy is called Bacchus, and he's from Greek mythology. His flagpole base stands as a memorial to Augustus Canfield Ledyard, who graduated from Yale in 1898, but was killed while a soldier in the Spanish-American War the following year. Though well tarnished after more than 100 years, I bet this face was still pretty ugly even when it was new. My first question upon learning Ledyard's story was, why would Ledyard's classmates put such an ugly face at the base of their memorial to him? Well, consider this. Ledyard died tragically and much too early. Even on this campus of learning and architectural beauty, this ugly face serves as a shocking reminder of our own mortality and not to take life for granted. My research tells me that collegiate Gothic architecture came into style on college campuses in the late 1800s. This means that Yale's Dwight Hall must have been among the trendsetters that helped start this movement, since it was built some years earlier, in 1842. This is evident in the decoration. Not only is it older, Dwight's decoration is crafted somewhat crudely and seems less refined than Yale's 20th century grotesques. Berkeley College has a memorial to the bronze lions, which stood on the spot before these buildings were built. The originals can still be seen at the university power plant. Note the workman climbing the ladder on the left for scale. He lost his head years ago. Berkeley College is named for George Berkeley, or more accurately, Bishop George Berkeley of Ireland, and his mitre rests atop a weather vane atop Berkeley's south building. His Holiness's mitre can also be found decorating the niches on either side of Berkeley's entrance on Elm Street as well. Also notice the clover, which is symbolic of Bishop Berkeley's homeland of Ireland. A dormitory complex called the Berkeley Oval occupied the spot where Berkeley College now stands. In 1878, the world's first telephone exchange was installed here. It's remembered with this relief on Berkeley College's Elm Street facade and portrays this switchboard operator dressed as Cleopatra. Now, I don't think this is what the operators actually wore, but unlike the famous Egyptian queen, she has headphones, has a telephone, and a phone line in her right hand for connecting calls. The exchange itself, called the Roundhouse, is shown at the lower left. Now, on a personal note, I had read about this relief and tried many times to find it without success. I only happened upon it by chance while walking by on a winter's day, because as you see, it's behind a tree, so it's hidden by leaves much of the year. This is the former location of Yale's post office, called Yale Station. So Berkeley has a cornice theme with objects used in the mail. Going from the lower right, you have envelopes, sealing wax, stamps, postcards, a postal cancellation stamp, and in the upper right, a post box. Close look at the post box reveals its owner's name to be Rogers. This is a reference to James Gamble Rogers, who was not only the architect of this building, but many more of Yale's grotesquely infested buildings. Another of James Gamble Rogers' buildings is Memorial Quadrangle. A quick note on the dates. As you see here, I've listed two of them. Oh, no, that's the next slide. But on the next slide, I list two of them because the Memorial Quadrangle was built in 1921. And then it was divided into residence colleges in 1933. That I'll get to on the next slide. So first is the year of construction. Second is the year the building's current identity was established. One of the residence colleges that make up Memorial Quadrangle is called Brantford College. This is what the gentleman I mentioned at the beginning was actually looking for. But why would there be a residential college at Yale named after the town of Brantford? Well, in 1701, 10 ministers met at the Reverend Samuel Russel's house in Branford to discuss the formation of a college in the Connecticut colony. This was the spiritual founding of what was to become Yale University. The meeting's purpose was to make a formal commitment to the founding of the Collegiate School of Connecticut. This somewhat bland name was chosen to remain below the notice of the British colonial government. The name would later be changed to Yale College in recognition of a sizable donation of money and books from Elihu Yale. Therefore, the university currently known as Yale University was founded at 147 Monowee Street in Branford, where Caron's Corner grocery store is currently located. I hope I pronounced that right. So the next time you're picking up groceries there, remember that Yale was founded on this spot 320 years ago. Brantford College also has an entry gate named for James Pierpont, one of the 10 ministers at the Russel House meeting. Because he secured the charter of the school and, like Samuel Russel, served as a founding trustee. Brantford College also features Yale graduate and theologian Jonathan Edwards, the author of the famous sermon entitled "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God." With that in mind, it is not surprising to find him looking down in judgment upon the goings-on in Brothers in Unity courtyard. An interesting thing about Memorial Quadrangle is, in addition to references to people and events of Yale's past, there are also some strange things as well, such as these characters roosting under a bay window. Are they bats or frogs? They're really just some fanciful creature. This relief frames a small window. It depicts the Memorial Quadrangle complex under construction in 1920. You'll see many memorials to important Yale people and donors around the campus, but this one is dedicated to the workers who built Yale's buildings. The words at the bottom mean, these buildings stand as a testament to the skill of the artisans who built them. Yale knew, even before it was finished, the architectural significance of Memorial Quadrangle. Wrexham Tower is actually a replica of the tower at St. Giles Church in Wrexham, Wales. The original stands over the spot where Elihu Yale is entombed. The Yale version of the tower has decorative human grotesques around its facades, but a closer look shows something else. Small versions of Yale's mascot, Handsome Dan the Bulldog, are hidden on the tower as well, similar to the hidden Mickeys in the Disney theme parks. To me, the Yale campus is a lot like Disneyland. Handsome Dan appears again at the entrance to Wrexham Courtyard, this time as different student characters. A football player, an ROTC officer that somebody drew a mustache on, and a nerd, complete with glasses and bow tie. Harkness Tower is the most distinctive feature of Memorial Quadrangle. Like a film or stage prop, Harkness Tower uses forced perspective to appear taller than it actually is. The scale of the architectural elements gets smaller the higher they are positioned, and the tower itself tapers and is divided into thin spires at the top. As a result, a prominent tower seems much taller. Ironically, looks taller the farther away you get. Also notice that most of its ornamentation is concentrated on the top half of the tower, suggesting it was designed to be seen from far away. Decoration positioned on the lower reaches of the tower would be obscured by trees and other buildings when viewed at a distance. The lower decoration surrounding the clock face consists of 8-foot figures of Yale worthies, such as Noah Webster, seen here holding his dictionary, and Elihu Yale himself. Near the top are smaller student figures, representing the freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior classes. Closer look at the tower shows some odd things, like a man with a bird standing on his head on the lower right, and a bulldog puppy on the upper left. The Sterling Law buildings have many grotesques, and some of which are even critical of the legal profession. Lining the main entrance arches are vignettes demonstrating different aspects of the legal system. Some are symbolic, like this prisoner who must decide between the influence of an angel and the devil. And others are more brutally specific, with the bag of loot in the thief's hand and the safe he broke into to steal it above his head. Above the main entrance door is a relief depicting a lively professor teaching a less than lively class. A frequent theme found in the grotesques of this building is the result of succumbing to the temptations of man's vices, such as alcohol and laziness. Note that laziness isn't just shown by the position of his body, but by the fact that spiders have built their webs on him and his books, implying that neither has moved in a while. But there is hope for this well-dressed young lawyer. Note the owl for wisdom watching over him. Under a bay window along Wall Street are a judge and policeman surrounding criminals that represent 3 of man's vices. From the left, you have a thief with a rope and a mask over his eyes for greed, a rather discreetly portrayed prostitute for lust, and a drunkard with an overflowing liquor bottle soaking his head for gluttony. Another vice portrayed in the building is gambling. In addition to gambling, he has turned his back on the church. There's a pipe under his chair. He was smoking and drinking. See the devil on the bottle? Notice a recurring anti-alcohol theme on some of the grotesques of this building. Keep in mind this building was built in 1930, before prohibition was repealed, so the evils of alcohol were still widely touted. An interesting thing about this grotesque, it's paired with another of a man piously reading the Bible, so you can contrast the good and the bad paths a person can take. Someone on one of my tour groups perceptively pointed out that of these 2 figures, it's only the one on the left that's actually smiling. So I'll leave you to interpret the significance of that for yourselves. Other reliefs relating to the law are this one, dramatizing punishment, and this one portraying the blinding of justice. Over a doorway in the courtyard, a policeman arrests a thief. Note the pearls the thief has stolen. On the opposite wall of the courtyard, there's a line of lawyers, punctuated on one end with a snail, which is a comment on the pace of the modern justice system. There was also an executioner to demonstrate one possible outcome of the proceedings. Some of the roofs are topped with different characters, like this bulldog in judge's robes. Note the S in his medallion for sterling. And others personify different, less than admirable characteristics of the legal profession, like this nicely dressed litigator with the head of a mule. Some stonework may look like generic decoration, but that doesn't mean you can't find something interesting in it, like these manacled hands decorating the ceiling of an exit portico. Payne Whitney Gymnasium is modeled after Liverpool Cathedral in England. Continuing the metaphor inside, the main lobby is encircled by figures of athletes, like this weightlifter, baseball player, and football player. These are reminiscent of Michelangelo's series of unfinished slaves on display in Florence. Like Michelangelo's, these figures seem to be struggling to free themselves from the physical constraints of the masonry. This elevates the physical exertion of athletes to a religious struggle, to free the soul of physical limitations and to aspire to a more enlightened existence. On the lighter side, playful animals decorate one of the entrances at Trumbull College. In the courtyards, subjects range from the domestic, like this cleaning woman with her brush and dustpan, to the fantastic, like this demon on the roof of the head of college's house. This is one of the only grotesques I found that's painted. In fact, it's painted every year to look like various characters. This one represents the college's current dean, having a private moment. Location? Why, a roof in Potty Court, of course. Silliman College has incorporated the buildings that were originally part of the Sheffield Scientific School. Above the entrance, two strange heads sneer down at those entering. Next door is a building that was constructed by the St. Anthony Hall Society, a society originally associated with the Sheffield Scientific School. But now the building is partially owned by the university. It features these grimly distorted figures spaced along its cornice. Even St. Anthony himself. St. Anthony was an ascetic who isolated himself in the desert for many years, his only companion being a pig. Lee Hall is in the University School of Music. So why does it have these bruised and bandaged bulldogs carved into its front door? Why is there an angel of mercy above the entrance and the rod of Asclepius too? That's because when this building was constructed, it was originally home to the University Health Center, where many sick and injured bulldogs came for treatment. As I have found in doing research for this project, building histories can be more confusing than a family tree. Many of Yale's buildings are designed to look like they date from the Middle Ages, but the Hall of Graduate Studies is intended to look much older. The use of form and pattern make the building look as if it is left over from a combination of ancient cultures. Collegiate Gothic with some 1930s Art Deco styling mixed in. At the main entrance, lifelike faces of graduate school dignitaries line the arches. Remember earlier when I was describing Berkeley College and mentioned the niches flanking its entrance? The Hall of Graduate Studies has niches around its entrance as well. These may seem empty, but if you are particularly curious, you can look up under the canopy and see something very curious. This guy, Mr. Yuck. This is what you get for being so darn curious. Along the exterior walls, there is sculpture that look like ancient sarcophagi. They have abstract bodies, but realistic faces. The faces are so realistic because the masons who sculpted them used the other masons as their models. The Hall of Graduate Studies has these totems that can be found along its York Street walls and look like they're from early Mesoamerican cultures. Sterling Memorial Library is a library designed as a medieval cathedral to knowledge. It is covered inside and out with grotesques. The entrance has symbols and text from many ancient cultures. Pictograms and hieroglyphs are a few of the types of ancient languages here that profess a scholar's love of knowledge and learning. A medieval scribe and scholar can be found on either side of its main front window arch. Figures on the cornices of the reading rooms, such as Leonardo da Vinci, representing the fine arts, William Shakespeare, representing literature, and Christopher Columbus, representing geography, are symbolic of the variety of subjects that can be researched within. Now, personally, I find it ironic that Columbus represents geography, since he thought he was in India when he made landfall on the New World. I said Sterling Memorial Library was built to resemble a cathedral, and it even comes complete with a confessional, but the person you might be confessing to might be miles away because it's actually a phone booth. Note the old style phones they are using. Sadly, in this age of smartphones, it's now just a closet. The library has a cruciform or cross layout, as many medieval cathedrals do, and many fanciful and scary creatures reside on its ceiling, like this mermaid and bat. The exhibition hallway features many corbels between its windows. One shows you can find unexpected things in your studies, maybe something you'd rather not know, and apparently would make your hair stand on its end. Note the owl for wisdom in front of him, and death creeping up behind him. No matter how hard you are studying, it's still important to keep a sense of humor. Note Urajoke in his textbook. Looks oddly similar to the text speak of today. Still others depict things that can distract a student from his studies. Like smoking, he used to have a cigar between his fingers, drinking, lust, and just plain old laziness. Sterling Memorial Library predicts its own significance by depicting this guide giving a tour of the building. The figures at their shoulders are neighboring corbels, and there's a bulldog at the bottom on the right. If it looks dark around the guide's mouth, that's because someone had recently put lipstick on him. Even the janitor's duties are immortalized. Outside of the star reading room, a variety of heads are spaced between the windows, representing the different cultures of the world. A Turk, an African tribesman, and an Eskimo are among them. This room is just inside the entrance on Wall Street, and it has a lot of decorative stonework. Inside its decoration is a hidden animal, and I don't mean the bird at the top. What is the strange creature concealed at the bottom of this sculpture on the lower right? A large spider is hidden in this sculpture. Now, I'm no sculptor, but I would think that it is no easy task to carve inside of such a tight space. Now, why go through the trouble to sculpt something which many people may not even see? Well, when you hide little surprises in the decoration, it forces those who do find them to look closer and appreciate all the stonework, enhancing the overall experience for them, something to which I can personally attest. Just outside the entrance from Wall Street, a lamp is held by a disembodied hand, reminiscent of Thing from the Addams Family. Above the lamp is a beetle and its larvae, whose scientific name escaped me, but I do know that its larvae is commonly known as the bookworm. Over Sterling Memorial Library's York Street entry, there can be found a series of reliefs showing various buildings at Yale that serve as libraries. If we zoom in on the first of the series on the far left, we see a familiar sight, Branford's Russel House again. Not only did 10 ministers make a commitment to found a college, they each donated books from their personal collections to this new school, thus making the Russel House the first repository of books for this institution. The house was demolished in 1835, but its stores remain preserved in Sterling Memorial Library's 1742 room, along with some of the original books donated at the meeting. I must include one which I sarcastically call Pilgrim's Progress. The unique way in which it portrays the uneasy relationship between Native Americans and Puritan settlers piqued my curiosity early on. This raw and brutal view of history was the first to make me realize that Yale's grotesques are more than just stuffy historic sculpture, and set me on the path of seeking out as many as I could find. Now, that having been said, I would like to update you on the progress of Pilgrim's Progress. Here's a photograph of Pilgrim's Progress from the previous slide. I took this photo many years ago. Here's Pilgrim's Progress in a photo taken in 2017. See the difference? The Puritan's rifle has been blotted out. This was an attempt by Yale at political correctness. If you look closely, you'll see that the Native American's bow is still visible. Ironically, you can interpret this in a very un-PC way. Since only the Native American has a weapon, he can be now interpreted as the aggressor. This only furthers the outdated stereotype of the uncivilized Indian preying on the defenseless European. All I can say about this is, if Marty McFly from Back to the Future has taught us anything, it's that you can't change the past without ruining the present. Now, Pilgrim's Progress has since been removed due to further controversy. Through the use of visual techniques like forced perspective, many references to literature, history, culture, and the sciences, the Yale campus is planned down to the smallest detail. Why? To cultivate a feeling of loyalty, unity, and sense of history and all those associated with the campus. When you set foot on Yale's campus, you know you have arrived somewhere special. Yale is an idea that transcends its architectural, spiritual, physical, scientific, and intellectual achievements. Yale, the concept, is much more than the sum of its parts. Yale's Gargoyles and Grotesques, along with its revivalist architecture, serve to deepen its historic foundation. There is much a part of the essence of Yale as Handsome Dan the Bulldog or the Yale Precision Marching Band. They are essential to the ideals and spirit of the university. The most difficult thing about putting together this presentation is deciding which images to leave out. So there's many, many more, or as I like to say, Yale is more grotesque than you can shake a student loan application at, though any other financial aid document will do. So in closing, let me just say you don't have to travel to some exotic place in Europe to see interesting grotesques. It's as close as a trip to New Haven. So my book, The Grotesque 10, is available at that's my other book. My book, An Education in the Grotesques, The Gargoyles of Yale University, is available at my website, yalegargoyles.com, and on Amazon. And you can email me at matthew.duman@yahoo.com. So let's see. So where is Branford? Well, it's either off exit 53 through 56 off of I-95 or in New Haven. It's located on the block between York and High Streets at the base of Harkness Tower, which is right behind me. So that's my lecture. Are there any questions?
Hi, Matt. Matt Radulski here. I'll go ahead and get my video turned back on and take a look at chat so that we can see this. My eyes will be glancing all over as I figure out some of this because, again, our expert is Jenna and she's otherwise engaged. There you go. Okay, I've got chat open. If anybody would like to ask a question, please feel free to go ahead. And a note from Carol. She's saying, and Matt, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay.
I gotcha.
Perfect. Okay. A note from Carol saying, first, thank you. That was fascinating. Second, what years were most of these carved?
A lot of these were carved in the 1920s and early 1930s. That's when Yale had a big building boom. And a lot of the buildings like Sterling Memorial Library and a lot of the original residential colleges were built at that time. So that's when a lot of these were carved, but some of them are older.
Okay, and sorry to everybody about the view right here. Let me go ahead and try to fix the video on that. While I'm doing that, second question. Do you do live tours? That's from Judy.
Right now, I am not doing tours, but I do usually do tours. I keep checking in with the woman who runs the Yale Visitor Center. And the last time I checked with her, she said the campus is still closed to tours due to COVID, but she hopes to have the campus open by this fall semester. So most likely in September. So I'm hoping that that the campus is open in September, that I can get back to doing tours. But yes, I do give tours normally.
Let me make a note of that, because when you start redoing them, if you want to send an email to me and Mike and other people involved in the Historical Society, we can publicize that to our members. We're a whopping something like 5.5 miles away as a crow flies.
Oh, okay, so, yeah, that's pretty convenient.
Tour restart. Okay, great. Oh, lots and lots of questions. Okay, let me go back up here. Luckily, we have till 8:30 if Matt's endurance can hold out.
That's fine.
Let's see. Oh, that's really interesting. Question from Jan. Saying that many of the grotesques appear whimsical. Are they in the original architectural drawings generally, or are they ad-libbed by the builders?
It really depends on the building. I think most of the time they're not included in the original architectural drawings. And I say it depends on the building because a lot of buildings at Yale, there's more important buildings and there's less important buildings. Now, Sterling Memorial Library, which was the last building I talked about, is a very important building. It's a centerpiece of campus. And for that building, I remember reading that they actually had a committee of people made up of the architect, trustees from the school, faculty members, etc. And they would all decide on iconography that went on these buildings. Now, there are other buildings that are maybe a little less important that sometimes they just let the Masons put whatever they want on there. So it really depended on the importance of the building to the university.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Let's see. Another question, again about grotesques, etc. The two new colleges that they have there, are there grotesques, etc. on those? I know that they're kind of modernist or brutalist or something that I don't know how to describe. Anything there?
The two new colleges, I think Benjamin Franklin and Pauli Murray, yeah, they were built in 2017. When I came out with this book, it was some years ago. It was before those colleges were built. So my new book, which includes Yale plus 9 other schools that I went to photograph, has a big section of grotesques from those buildings. So those buildings do have grotesques on them, mainly different types of reliefs relating to the history of New Haven and the history of the university.
Good, thank you. And let me correct something I said. When I think, because I'm 56 years old and I used to hang around in New Haven when I was a teenager, the new colleges to me are Styles and Morse. And you might have mentioned
Okay.
that, but my brain was racing. So if I think of Styles and Morse behind what's the bookstore, what used to be the Yale Co-op, that has kind of a pebble finish, that's what I was talking about.
Yeah. Okay. Those colleges, they were built in the 60s and they're very modernist, and they
Yeah.
really don't have much in the way of grotesque sculpture because they're in the wrong architectural style.
Right, right. Yeah, the new colleges I've enjoyed driving by, but never slowly enough to take a look at any of the details on those. Really interesting.
The new
Um,
college are interesting because they are collegiate Gothic in style. And part of the collegiate Gothic architectural style is different little tricks to make you think the building is older than it actually is. So you'll see like random window frames bricked up, and empty niches without any sculpture in them. And you can find those at the new colleges. So you can find a random window frame bricked up, even though, and I remember I took a picture on opening day of the college of a bricked up window. You're supposed to assume that this building has been around for so long that there's been renovations and things over hundreds of years. When actuality, it was built with all those features from the start to make you think it's older.
yeah, I've heard some interesting stories about the older part of Yale. 1890s, 1910s, about how they made it look older. But I'll come back to that if there's time. I want to get
Mhm.
to as many of the questions as possible. Let's see. Um, let's see. Um, oh, I see. Jan, who asked about the whether they're in the drawings, she later updated that to say the stonemasons. Yes, so you did answer that. Apparently the stonemasons did ad lib some of those.
Yes.
Okay. From Catherine, she says fascinating. Thank you. She says she's ready to jump in the car and visit the campus. And
When you go to campus to see these, I highly recommend that you bring maybe binoculars or something, or maybe a camera with a zoom lens, because because some of these are pretty high up and you want to get a pretty good view. So you need some kind of magnification to do, some kind of magnification is good for that.
You took those words right out of my notes. I'd already written down binoculars for a tour, which I certainly have not done when I've been on tours of Yale before. Let's see. What's a definition of grotesque in the architectural sense?
Well, in
And I'm
architectural
sorry,
terms,
that's a question from Chris. What's the definition of
Oh,
grotesque?
okay.
Go ahead.
Well, as I said, there's grotesque and there's gargoyle. The umbrella term, the overall term is grotesque for any type of decoration on or in a building. Now, the word gargoyle is falls within that category. It's the as I said, the umbrella, the general term is grotesque, any kind of decoration on a building, and a gargoyle is one specific type of grotesque, one that channels rainwater off the roof.
Gotcha. Okay, good. Thank you. Another question, after saying great presentation, is from Anne Marie. Can anyone just wander the Yale campus and look at these?
Um, yes, you can. It's right in the middle of New Haven, so now you're not allowed access to inside the courtyards or anything. And I think with COVID, you can't go into the library. Normally, you can go into the library, but I think they're only allowing faculty and students inside. But you still can walk around from the street and see a lot of these grotesques. As I said before, you just have to, it helps to have some kind of binoculars. And I used to hang around Yale when I was growing up, and I never saw any of these. I just didn't look closely. It was only later when I started picking these out that I went down streets that I had been down many times in my life. Only now I gave myself a new perspective because I was seeing all these new things that I've never seen before. Things that have been there for 80 years, but a lot of people just don't see them because they don't look up.
Right. I feel the same way. I happened to be killing a few minutes outside the law school, I think it was, and happened to notice a lot of the things you talked about, the law and justice and criminal and other things. They really are interesting. Just, those are public streets. And then inside
Yep.
the campus, some areas may be open, some may be closed due to COVID-19. And then when people take the tour, which is well worth it just for the entertainment part, that's where you go into all sorts of little courtyards and things that students can only get into with a swipe card. And the tour guides have, of course, being students, they've got the swipe cards and they can get you into all those little courtyards where I think some of those pictures, like the cleaning woman, I think those are
Yeah.
tucked away where you wouldn't be able to see it
Yeah.
unless you're
So
on a tour.
certain grotesques like that are inside courtyards that
Right.
you don't have access to.
Excellent. Good. Let's see. Okay. Here's cheers from Texas with lots of thank yous and saying it was a
Texas,
treat to
huh?
attend.
Great.
Yeah. Have you come across, very interesting question from Nancy. Have you come across other gargoyles or grotesques that have been removed to be politically correct? Another question is, that I would add to that have been altered in some way, such as the Pilgrim? Or is that the sole
Um,
example you've seen?
At Yale, that's the only example I've seen. When one of the other schools I visited was Duke University in North Carolina, and they had at the Duke Chapel around the entranceway they have great men of the American South, and one of them was Robert E. Lee, and that sculpture was defaced, so they took that away. That's the only other example I can think of.
Right. Well, I can think that with the renaming of John C. Calhoun College,
Yes.
to Hopper College, a woman who I met when I was in the Navy, as a
Oh,
matter
Grace
of
Hopper.
fact.
Oh, I didn't
Yeah,
know
yeah,
that.
yeah, a long time ago. But yeah, I assume that some things have been covered up there. Maybe there's something of
Well,
Calhoun that's now missing.
I mean, from what I haven't been all around the college, but from what I've seen, a lot of the sculpture is still there. You can actually see above the cross-campus entrance where it says Calhoun College,
Right.
even though they've changed the name. So I really don't. It doesn't seem like they've taken away any of the grotesque, even though they've changed the name of the college.
Interesting. Okay, good. Let's see. A question that I think you handled a little bit later. Are gargoyles made for any of the new buildings at Yale to keep up a tradition? And I think you covered that in talking about the Murray and Franklin colleges.
Yeah, what it really depends on is the architectural style of the buildings. The more modern buildings don't have these decorative features, but when they go for the Gothic style, the collegiate Gothic style, It's a lot of those buildings have, whether they're old or new, a lot of those buildings have this type of decoration.
Right. Let's see. Just a general thank you. This was a brilliant presentation. That's from Judy. I think we heard from her before. Here's one that might be outside your wheelhouse, but do any current Yale courses include studying the gargoyles and grotesques?
Hmm. Um, I really don't know. I do know in general that a lot of, if they do, they probably would not be in the architecture school, because a lot of modern architects these days view the use of gargoyles and grotesques to be very sentimental and backward looking. They like the more modern aspects of architecture. So don't know, I can't say for sure, but I'm betting that if there is a course like that, it's probably maybe in the art school, or maybe in the art history building rather than the architecture building.
Yeah, and looking at the architectural style of the architecture building itself,
That's,
and
yeah, they're the
I can't
brutalist.
remember.
Yes.
I cannot. Louis Kahn, I think, was the architect. He's not a big guy for gargoyles or
No,
grotesques.
no. Roundabout this style, the collegiate Gothic style, kind of faded away in the 1930s with and the rise of modernism came up with the war and industrialization, and people like to get rid of all this, what as they considered superfluous decoration, meaningless decoration, as they put it. So that's why things shifted to modern type of architecture, which is very form follows function, and doesn't really have much of this decoration just for decoration's sake.
Right, and that leads me to a thought. When I visit my old campus, which was built mainly in 1820s and 1830s, in very much the old style brick and white lumber, the chapel is collegiate Gothic. I'll have to look for grotesques on that. Let's see. Um, are there any horse grotesques or unicorns? I know that you talked about the mythical creature, the Yale. What about specifically
Hmm.
horses or unicorns?
I have not seen. I have not seen unicorns. The Yale creature has two horns, so I know that's not a unicorn. Um, Horse grotesques. I know in the library there's, on like the mezzanine, when you go in up um, on the main area of the library, there's different reliefs from different significant parts in Yale history, and I think a few of those have horses as relating to maybe the Revolutionary War or that type of thing. So, but those are the only ones I can think of.
Well, it's another reason for people to go take a look around and see what they see especially when the campus reopens and when you're giving tours
No,
around. So you've got another thing on your checklist, Matt.
yeah, and I have to say, I mean, I like to see that. I like to say that I've seen a lot of these grotesque, but I've learned many years ago when I finished all this photography in September, and I said, "Oh, I think I've seen everything at Yale." Then all the leaves come off the trees, revealing a whole lot more. So ever
Mhm.
since then, I can never tell myself that I've seen everything, and I'm still finding new things.
Oh, that's a good tip for all of us. Don't just look at it in the summer when things are covered up. Let's see. Let's see. Another question is from Pat. Thank you for your presentation. Are all of these locations accessible to the public? I think we answered that. Some definitely you need to go on a Yale tour, and even then, they don't go to every place. So I
Yes.
think the answer is you have to become a Yale student to see everything.
Yeah, but there is a lot that's visible from the street that you don't have to
Yes.
actually get into the buildings to see, though.
And if you stand around with binoculars looking into the courtyard, you might attract the interest of campus security. And here's one, Matt, it's up to you whether you want to respond to this. It's from Steve. How do you feel about these features being altered based on modern opinion?
um, I'm really thoroughly against it. I That grotesque, the Pilgrim's Progress, that was the first grotesque I saw and started this whole thing for me. And so, and it really, I thought before that, I thought all these grotesques I assumed were very historical and maybe a little stuffy and maybe a little interesting to look at, but nothing too spectacular. But then I saw through that grotesque, I saw that there's a sense of humor and social commentary, and I saw there's a lot more to this. So I wasn't happy when I saw that that had been altered. And I really think, and this is just my opinion, but I really think that you really can't learn from history if you just erase it. And so even though you may not agree with it, I think it's important that we see how people's attitudes were back in the bygone age, just to learn. And so that's how we move forward, is learning from our mistakes.
Yeah, interesting. I listened to a podcast called The Tides of History, and people here, participants here, might be interested in listening to that. I find it interesting. Talking about dynasties in Egypt, pharaohs would succeed other pharaohs. Would be a big dynastic changeover, and all sorts of symbols were chiseled off the older monuments.
Yeah, and other cultures had to do the same type of thing.
Yeah, the effacement, because of course words and symbols have power. But back to the questions. Let's see. From Rose, do you believe the architects might have seen grotesque in European trips and based their design on these? And then there's something that isn't quite fleshed out. Have photos of similar men and designs. I get the idea. That I think Rose is asking, do you see similarities between European examples and the ones at Yale? And from what experience did the architects use the grotesque? Go ahead, Matt.
I'd have to say wholeheartedly yes, because even just the architecture of the buildings, this collegiate Gothic architecture is directly based on medieval universities like Oxford or Cambridge, and there is records of the architects before they start designing the buildings in America. They go to these universities like Oxford in Europe and take measurements and directly those medieval buildings directly inspired a lot of these buildings. And the same thing with the grotesques. Now, when the use of grotesques in collegiate Gothic architecture started in the mid to late 1800s, a lot of the grotesque and subject matter was referenced the Middle Ages. It would be, kings and knights and things. But as the style went on into the 1900s, they got more self-referential and more about the university itself.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah. And I know that certainly many students went on what they'd call the grand tour of Europe and study all sorts of things and make their own drawings. I've seen some beautiful examples of that. They're definitely soaking up the culture. Then let's see. A question from Faith. How do you feel about adding grotesques to modern architecture? I don't know of any examples like that, but you've got more experience than I have.
I mean, I've seen, you can do it. It just, there's a lot that has to go in, got a lot of thought that has to go into the aesthetics. Because it can be very nice to have that juxtaposition of the new and the old, or it can be just conflicting. It depends on how it's handled by the decorator and the architect, really.
That makes perfect sense. Let's see. Oh, here's an interesting question. Again, it might be out of your wheelhouse, but who were the stonemasons? That's from Kate.
I get that question a lot, and I wish I had more information, but there is not a lot of information on Masons in particular. There's a few names that came up. There's one was Lee Laurie, who did a lot of architectural sculpture, and he was a sculpture professor at Yale in the early part of the century. And now it said he was in charge of the sculpture on Harkness Tower. That doesn't mean he did the sculpture himself. I envision him having a bunch of masons working under him that he directed. And in the same way, another name was Renee Chamberlain, who did a lot of architectural sculpture in New York and Chicago in the 1920s and 30s. And he was in charge of the sculpture at Sterling Memorial Library. Again, that doesn't mean he actually did all of the sculpture, but he directed it and he supervised it. I always wondered, as I said, Yale had a big building boom in the 1930s. And I said, that's a strange time to build a lot of buildings, because that was right in the middle of the Great Depression, the early 30s. And then I did a little more looking into it, and a lot of stonemasons came from Italy before, and they immigrated to the United States and settled in the Worcester Street area before that. So then during the Great Depression, when a lot of people were desperate for work, Yale got a lot of these very talented stonemasons who trained in the old country to do sculpture on their buildings on their campus for a lot less money because of the Great Depression.
Interesting. That reflects a little bit on the history of the town of Branford too, where we have giant quarries in some parts of town, and there were quarries in other parts of town that have since closed down. And I imagine that with the reduction in the overall demand for quarried material, that I had to imagine was prevalent in the Great Depression. Although, of course, with the WPA, the government was buying in for the CCC, there might have been a lot of people who had been working in quarries who had some skills and might have been snapped up by Yale for the same sort of thing. Of course, they were so close, they were a trolley ride away back in the 30s. A question from Sherry. Everybody get ready. Any other female carvings, or is it just a maid, prostitute, and mermaid?
Yeah, sadly, there is not too many female carvings. Yale only began admitting women in, I think, 1969. So when all these were carved, it was strictly a male university. So yeah, regrettably, there isn't too many female grotesques around Yale.
Well, that leads to the thought that we need a further set of field trips to Smith and Mount Holyoke, and Pembroke is now part of Brown, Barnard, Vassar.
I'm always getting suggestions from other people. That's how it was when I was doing this lecture, live lecture at libraries for this book, that people kept coming up to me afterwards and suggesting other schools I should go to. And that's where I got the idea to do my second book. And so I included Yale, and I went to 9 other schools as well. And people are still suggesting other schools I should go to.
Right. Or looking around New Haven, there's another great question. Have you noticed any grotesques? I'm sure I left out some of the Seven Sisters. I apologize in advance, but those are the ones that came to mind right off the top of my head. Let's see. Matt, have you noticed any grotesques on Gothic revival buildings in New Haven that are not part of Yale? I can answer a yes, but you may have more detail. Go ahead.
Well, I do know, especially on the churches, that there are grotesques and gargoyles on the Gothic churches around New Haven. I can think of one, a smaller one on Whaley Avenue, and another one it's down by Modern Pizza. I forgot the name of the street. That do have sculptures hanging off their buildings. Plus, there's also on these churches religious sculpture as well.
Right. I think Modern's on State, and Trinity Church Episcopal on the Green, I think, is a Gothic style. And I'm sure that I've looked at that and seen gargoyles or grotesques on that. That's right on the Green.
Yes. And as I said before, if you go and look, see that there's some detail up there, just take your binoculars and get a closer look. And I've noticed when I first started this project, I was surprised at how small these grotesques and gargoyles were. I always thought they wanted people wanted people to see their work, they would make it really big because it was so high up. But then I realized when I got into this, when I started doing more research, that it's about how you approach the building. Basically, there's like layers of detail. From far away, you see like the basic form of the building, and that kind of interests you a little bit. So you get a little closer, and then you see features like windows and dormers and that sort of thing. Then you get a little closer and closer, and then you realize until you can see small detail. And it's about how the building draws you in and makes you get closer to it.
That's a great point, and that reflects back on the forced perspective of Harkness that you talked about.
Yes.
Interesting. Let's see. From Barbara, she states that she's curious about the Masons. Where did they come from, and how did they become such specialists? Any further insight than besides what we talked about?
Well, I know that you can see a lot of Italian influence in a lot of this sculpture, especially on the library and the law school, which I might say are right across the road from one another. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of them were Italian, but I think really they came from all over.
Yeah, I know somebody in Branford. I won't say the family name, but his grandfather came over from Sweden. He was a stonecutter, a mason, and worked extensively at Yale in the early 1900s. So I know it's from more than solely Italy. And of course, a great tradition of stone carving. You look at Gothic cathedrals all over Europe. They're great.
Oh yeah, in
carvers,
Germany,
masons
and
everywhere.
France, yes.
Let's see. Another question. This one's from Judith. Were the Masons from America or Europe? I think it's a mix, is what we'd guess.
Yeah, a lot of them either trained or have European ties, but yeah, there's some of the later ones are American.
Certainly. All right. Let's see. Judy says that she had to log off. She loved this presentation. Thank you. And Sherry, getting back to the topic of female figures, says that she was expecting a goddess or two. LOL.
Yeah, it really is regrettable that when I've been hearing the reaction of a lot of people that, yeah, I looked at it and yeah, the women are not represented too well at Yale, and I do wish there were some more female characters.
Well, like I said, Smith College, et cetera, might have what people are looking for. There might be an Athena hidden away. You've got an owl. Maybe there's a figure of Athena somewhere. Let's see. This is a question from Judith. Were any sculptures signed, or have you found any Mason's marks?
I have not found too much. The only one I know of is near Wrexham Tower in Memorial Quadrangle, and I believe it was at Brantford College, or the other college in Memorial Quadrangle is Saybrook College, and this is kind of right on the divider. I'm not sure exactly which college it belongs to, but there's a little plaque that's tells about that architect James Gamble Rogers that I mentioned before. Mm-hmm. And it's a relief. It shows him in Harkness Tower, and that is signed by the sculptor that I mentioned before, Lee Laurie. So that's the only one I can think of that's actually signed.
All right. Let's see. Any other questions? We still have time for a few more questions. Let's see. From someone saying, enjoyed the presentation. Thank you. While we wait to see if anybody else has anything to add, I will say about that Mason who came from Sweden. He also worked on the Soldiers and Sailors Monument, or it might be Sailors and Soldier. I'm former Navy. I prefer to put Sailor first. But up on top of East Rock, and that's got some really cool stonework, and that's got some really cool bas-relief bronze plaques. One of them's for the Mexican-American War. Another one's for the Spanish-American War. You don't see many monuments to those. But I was a history major, so it jumped out to me. I was going to note that for Harkness Tower, if you're visiting and looking at the grotesques, this is outside of Matt's area of expertise, but the grill work there at the main entrance facing the old campus is really cool. It's got a lot of different insignia from World War One military
Yes.
units. You can see that they're also sailors, Marines, Army people, Signal Corps, and you name
Yes,
it,
that's the
infantry.
Memorial Gateway there
Yeah.
has a
Oh,
lot
that's
of,
what it's called. Yeah, I think it says
yes.
Memorial Gateway over that. That's really cool grill work. If you're a geek as I
Yeah,
am.
the whole like the doors and the gates and the windows of Yale is a whole different ball game. There are some amazing work in those areas too.
Yes, indeed. Of course, I'm having trouble um, reading some of my own writing. Um, yeah, when you do the tour restart, do let us know. One further note that I heard about, I think I was on a Yale tour, so people may have heard this, but the masons who built the buildings, leaving aside the grotesques and the gargoyles, they did things like on the thresholds, they took big disc grinders and they ground them down to look as if people had been walking across those thresholds for hundreds of years, not
Yes,
1 year.
that's one of those aging techniques that I mentioned before. There's some of the
That's very cool.
stairways are worn, and to make you think that it's been hundreds of years of footsteps of people going up and down the stairs, when in actuality they're probably around 50 years old or so, and
Right.
they actually were designed with a groove in them at the beginning to make them look worn and older. And
Excellent.
these techniques are meant to work on you in an almost subliminal level. You're supposed to see this and not even really think of it, just assume these buildings are very old, when in reality maybe they're 100 years old, or some of them are 80 years old, so they're old but not as old as you'd think.
Yeah, and you may know, are there more, antiquing practices that were carried out? I've heard of a few, but you may have noticed some that we wouldn't notice.
Well, there's, let's see, those empty niches.
Mhm.
I showed a few of them in the presentation.
Right.
They look like the perfect place for a statue. They have a flat base and they're a tall like alcove with kind of a decorative canopy. But if you go around Yale, you'll see them a lot, but most of them do not have anything in them. Now you're supposed to assume that originally hundreds of years ago, in your head, you're supposed to assume that all these were filled with dignified sculpture, but throughout the building's long and colorful history, the sculpture was either stolen or destroyed or just plain removed, when in actuality, most of these were empty from the beginning.
That's interesting. That's kind of an
Yes.
echo of what happened in Reformation Europe, with a lot of figures being destroyed by those who thought
Yes.
that they were
Good
not in
point.
keeping
Yeah.
with the religion as they wanted it practiced. We'll leave
Mhm.
out the politics of that. Um, what else? One other thing, the way they antique stuff, and you might have mentioned it, they would chip some of the leaded glass windows or
Oh
crack
yeah, that's
them,
a
and
whole
then and
other.
then and then add little streams of lead the way they really would be repaired. But they did
Well,
that when they were built.
if you look at Yale in particular, you see most of these collegiate Gothic buildings have these multi-pane casement windows, uh, and you'll look at a few of those panes, and you'll see that some of them look as if they've been cracked and repaired. But the odd thing and some of them have maybe a bit of maybe glass that's a different color stuck in there to make it look like it was paired later on. But the clue to 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 making you realize that these are not actual repairs later on is a lot of these repairs take the same form. In other
Oh,
words, a curve with another one branching off it, so it looks like a letter Y, which just happens to be the first letter of a familiar university.
I never noticed that. That's
There's
very interesting.
not all of them, but there's a lot of repairs, glass repairs at Yale that happen to form a letter Y for Yale.
Very interesting. Another note from Tom and Susan. They noted that quote, "There's the blackening of the library to make it look like it had been in a fire." Something I never noticed. Yeah, I would
Yeah,
have just thought it was a patina of age or soot.
there is a story. I can't say it's 100% true because a lot of these are because these stories that get passed down. But there's a story about Harkness Tower that that architect that I mentioned before, James Gamble Rogers, designed Memorial Quadrangle and Harkness Tower, which is right behind me. And so the story goes that it was built and finished in about 1921, but he wasn't, the story said that he wasn't satisfied. So the story has that he had acid poured down the building. Now, before he had the acid poured down, it said at the time it was the tallest freestanding stone structure. But since he had acid poured down the side, that weakened it enough that they had to put steel supports inside. So then after that, it was no longer the tallest freestanding stone structure in America.
Wow.
Because you had the acid poured. Now, I can't say that's true. There's a lot of things that you can't really substantiate. And a lot of this is passed down as like myth and legend. So I can't say it's true, but it's a good story.
There are a lot of good stories at Yale.
There's another story about him as well. The other, if you notice, a lot of the roofs are made of like the slate rock, and you'll notice a lot of them are very aged. They're with chips and cracks and discolorations in the slate, and those were purposely put there to make you think the building is older. And there's a story about that architect James Gamble Rogers where he saw the slates that were supposed to go up on one of his buildings, and he didn't like them because they were too new looking. So the story has it that he had them buried in Long Island Sound for about 6 months. Then they were dug up, and then they were nicely aged and pitted and cracked and things. And then he was satisfied and had them put up on the building.
That's pretty neat. Let me swing
So
back.
A lot of thought goes into those things.
Well, he's the only job. Let me go back to the top, see if I missed anything. And then we'll hand the floor back to Mike Russo to do his thank yous. I'll do a quick summary plugging membership as always, even if you're calling in from Texas. Let's see. I don't see anything new. If you wrote a question and I missed it, you're welcome to type it in right now. We've got a couple more minutes. Sorry, trying to read, talk, and think at the same time. You know something's going to suffer then. Yeah, so we all have to go look for horse grotesques. And we can look at that Yale creature with the two horns, and from the right perspective, it will look like a unicorn. Let's see.
Matt, a new question just came up.
Oh, let me scroll down the bottom. Oh, we might have handled that, but let's repeat that one. It's from Faith. How do you feel about adding grotesques to modern architecture?
Oh yeah, we had this one before, and yeah, I'll say what I said before it. I'm for it if it's handled in a tasteful and aesthetically pleasing way, and in other words, to avoid conflicting. Sometimes the juxtaposition of different styles can be very pleasing, but if it's not handled right, it can be just a conflict. So it really depends on how it's artistically and aesthetically handled.
Understood. Okay. Well, if I don't have any further questions, Mike, if I'll go ahead and hand it back to you to see if there's anything you want to add to this or talk about upcoming programs. I don't know if we've specified yet a speaker for the annual meeting and dinner, but Mike, you have the floor. I'll go ahead and mute myself.
Yeah,
everybody's saying thank you finally.
I just want to thank Matt for a wonderful program, very informative tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
For all the people, the participants, we had a great turnout, and I look forward to the day when we can meet in person, perhaps shortly, I'm hoping. But we do have a speaker for the annual dinner. We haven't nailed down the date yet, but I believe it's going to be sometime in October, and that'll be our speaker will be the town historian Jane Booley, and she always gives a wonderful talk on whatever the topic might be. But I do want to say that I look forward to the day, Matt, when the tours will be open again. That would be fascinating.
Yeah, so I'm very I'm excited about getting to it myself. And if you see on my back.
That's great. Yep.
The sign.
Yep, we could see it.
Gargoyle guide. That's good because I wear this outfit when I but I do the tour as well.
Oh, that's great. So, yeah, like, as I said, the annual dinner will most likely be sometime in October. Word will come out about that. There is, I see the question coming up, and yes, there will be a vegetarian option. I don't know if that's gonna meet the needs of vegans, but there will be a vegetarian option as well. And we look forward to seeing people there. As always, as Matt has said, okay, it's not vegan. Vegan is not vegetarian. My apologies. But anyway, Matt has again highlighted the need for members, and we really would love to see new members and people who want to get involved in the society. So that's about it for me, Matt. I want to thank you again, and I want to thank Jenna for all her help with the presentation. Thank you, everybody, and good night.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Oh,
Huh. Well, we lost Mike.
oh, yeah. Is there more?
Just a moment. First, for John, who's asking about a vegan meal, we'll definitely make sure that some are available. I happen to be lactose intolerant myself, so I usually order vegan just to make sure that they don't slip some cheese or butter or cream or something else delicious in there. Matt, I will echo the thanks from Mike Russo. Jenna, thank you as always. We can't see you now. You're probably busy helping get the library closed up right now. And to repeat what I said at the beginning and what Mike said, we hold lots of free programs, especially for school children. And the only way we can support that is by having a robust membership. I know you're buying this, that, or the other thing that you might not need. Throw $20 our way so that we can heat that house in the winter, because we can't let it freeze. On that cheery note, that's all I have. Jenna, did you want to appear and say anything, or are you all set?
Just thanks for coming, and thank you for that awesome program, Matthew. I was able to hear some of it, and it was super interesting. So thank you for sharing.
All right, thanks. Well, Jenna, if we have nothing further, let me take one more look at the questions. Oh, Matt, good. Matt, you entered in www.yalegargoyles.com and on Amazon. And
put in my email address too.
Okay. Sounds like an excellent idea. And if you want to email Mike and ask to have that put on the website as well, contact information, and then we can post stuff about your upcoming tours to keep people plugged into that. This is a great way to finish up. From Denise, interesting program and discussion. Thank you! Exclamation point. That's all I have. Jenna, if you want to end the meeting, we're all set.
All right, I'll go ahead and end it, and I'll have that recording available in the next couple of days.
No hurry on our part. That's great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.